Um, so, as the author of the Agile Change Handbook, the chief examiner for the Agile Change Agent course, I'm drawing a lot of the techniques from here. I'm also going to put this into the context of neuroscience because I have just finished the neuroscience for change at work book. Apparently, I do the final edits tomorrow, apparently. And it's going to be published on the 3rd of September. And I'm also the chief examiner for the Neuroscience for Change course as well. But we're going to look specifically at, we've got an overwhelming workload, haven't we? Nobody's not busy on this call. And those listening to the recording, the reason you're listening to the recording is you just didn't have the time to turn up live. You know, we're all exhausted. So let's use some agile planning techniques and be smart. So we're going to have a look at iterations, visuals, an iterative approach, Kanban, and prioritization. So I'm going to align this back to being brain smart all the time as well to be useful. For those of you who are new to this subject, or and those who want to put it into context, I'm drawing a lot of this from the Agile Change course, which gives us a roadmap structure. So it emphasizes how do we plan in an iterative and incremental way. So how do we divide any piece of work iteratively and incrementally? It also has lots of benefits hunting techniques which keep us motivated and help us work out what's the most valuable thing to be doing. We'll pick this up when we look at prioritization in a little while. And it also does quite a lot on relationship building, especially establishing your credibility for why anybody would want to follow your roadmap in the first place. The neuroscience for change course is about being brain smart and really understanding how the brain works. And I'm going to talk us through that because I think that will be, you'll see that this is the source of my sort of success criteria for anything that I do is it putting my brain into the right space to do the right things? So you'll find that the neuroscience for change course really gives us something very powerful insight into that. And I've also developed the Agile Change Coach course, which and qualification, which enables you to an amazing toolkit of neuroscience techniques. So it bounces off neuroscience and it bounces off Agile Change to actually help people engage and get on board and basically make change happen, do the things we want people to do. So Agile Change is applying all of the practice, bringing the concepts and principles of an agile world, irrespective of what agile methodologies might be in use in your organization or ones you've studied. It's basically bringing those principles into, yeah, I actually need to take people through the change curve. I need to take people from current ways of working to new ways of working. So I developed a whole load of techniques for helping make that happen in behavioral change. It's all about being smart, working iteratively, chunking things up. And actually, a lot of those techniques are great for dealing with a massive workload. So I thought I'd put that to you. It's very much a celebration of how incredibly useful agile approaches are. You know, and I think we can, by the end of this, we can go, actually, it's great. For all of you who've studied agile approaches and are thinking, I work in quite an agile way, you can basically pat yourselves on the back at the end of this and go, yeah, actually, I'm being a lot more brain smart than I ever thought I was. That's what we're going to be looking at. And I'm going to try and look at things not only from a sort of wider initiative, project or change perspective, but also how we deal with our own to-do lists. Yeah. So first things first, what's really important to me is that Agile offers me so many techniques to address my workload. But I hope I'm going to show that why they're successful by thinking about what does my brain really need. So let me have a little look at what's going on with the brain. The thing is, with my workload, it's going to create a threat response. That feeling, and I've had this feeling, by the way, I came into the office at 7 o'clock this morning and I absolutely have stomachache and I feel totally stressed because I have a whole load of unexpected things happened so far today. And it's a case of, I'll never get this done. There's so much to do. Also feeling that I'm rushing through things. So there's going to be mistakes that I sort of possibly discover after I've handed them over to customers. So I'm thinking, oh my God, will I have not only the humiliation of mistakes, but also where do I find the time to put things right? And feeling so under pressure, I can hear my heart racing. So that pressure puts me in that threat state. And the threat state um, is where I feel that anxiety. And the anxiety causes stress, and the stress creates a not very nice cocktail of chemicals in the brain. My brain triggers the production of adrenaline. It can sometimes be kind of helpful because it gives us a bit of pace. And you can see on here, towards the middle, there's a bit of peak performance, which is, getting to the peak. We have to have a little bit of stress, a little sense of urgency to get things done. My husband was telling me this morning that I work very well under pressure. True. The pressure mustn't be sustained. It mustn't be every minute of every day. Otherwise, we start to get very negative impact on the body. So what we want is we want to work at when we need to. So adrenaline can help us get that sense of urgency. We also need to work much more in a considered way, an organized way. That's what we're going to be looking at today, because that's where we can be creative. The adrenaline, the epinephrine, which is where it's a chemical that almost reduces our peripheral vision physically. So normally our peripheral vision is about 180 degrees. It actually narrows that. So not only in terms of how the eyes work, but also how we think. We start to lose the wider picture, the bigger context. We just focus in on the to-do list that's right in front of us. And of course, that means that we can't make connections with other things we should be doing. We don't have ideas because we're just so busy doing, we can't do thinking, in other words. And the cortisol, that stress hormone that we get. So a little of this can be stimulating too much. We feel sick, our heart races, our concentration decreases, and we're in the least useful state for being creative, for being innovative, which, after all, is the main focus of our work. We are paid for ideas. So what we need is we need to be able to move ourselves into that reward. My brain can only deal with the sort of in the threat response, sort of simple instructions. It can't process large volumes of information. It can't assimilate, it can't analyze, it can't make connections. So I need techniques that move me towards the right, move me more out of threat and into reward, into an emotional state. Emotion, by the way, are the brain chemicals and the electricity in the brain. So emotions are the state I am in, make me feel feelings on top of these emotions, make me feel energized, excited, curious, innovative, all the things that I want. So I'm interested in every technique that we use in things that trigger this reward state, including things that we know make us feel good. Achievements make us feel good. Yeah. Pride in how much I've achieved. Comfort from reducing the welter of things that I'm doing. A sense of feeling certain about what I'm doing, being excited by being able to be creative and have new ideas. So the reason I'm so passionate about the techniques in the Agile Change Handbook is because they feed certainty. They enable me to focus on having achievements and creating progress. It gives me a really positive brain chemicals. So I get things like the dopamine, every achievement that I have. I get the endorphins, that rush of feel good chemicals in the brain. I get oxytocin from a feeling of being part of something, trusting other people trusting me. I feel part of something because I'm delivering as expected. So they believe in me, so they're more willing to sort of partner with me. So this is a bigger context, really. It's about setting that wider context of why. what we're going to look at now, these simple techniques are so brain smart because they put my brain into the place it needs to be to do the information work, the value added work that is ultimately what I get paid for. And we're all in the same boat. So the first thing I want to pull out is a simple agile roadmap. Mm. Uh, the time frame divided into chunks. I call them iterations, you could call them increments, you could call them waves, phases, stages, whatever, but we've chunked things up. Already this helps the brain. Why? Because by chunking something up into smaller pieces, already my brain has got a bit of a pattern here. It can see that the whole is made up of smaller pieces. It's starting to see patterns. It starts to see, there are constituent parts to this. This is really helpful because each of the smaller parts feels a lot more manageable than the whole piece. So being able to chunk things up into smaller pieces really responds well to what the brain is looking for. The other thing is that by having chunked things up, what I can do is I can focus on the first chunk. My brain knows these other pieces of work, these other outcomes, these other requirements are out there, but I don't need to focus on those right. Another thing this does for the brain is it gives me a sense of certainty because actually what the roadmap is, it's a very visual representation of something, and I'll talk about visuals in a moment. But it gives me certainty because it's setting out a journey. Iteration one is followed by iteration two, followed by iteration three, followed by iteration four. So we've got a step-by-step journey. We're going to focus on step one, and once that's done, we'll move to step two. So my brain's thinking there's a pattern here. Actually, we've worked out the end-to-end journey, so it feels like there's a certainty and a flow to that, which sends a very powerful message. It's safe to proceed. You're not going to be wasting your effort, Melanie, because when you concentrate on iteration one, will then flow into the others. So it's sending that really powerful message to the brain. It's safe to proceed. I said I'd talk about the impact of visuals. Well, you're doing the most brain hungry thing right now, which is you're listening to me. This is why I put visuals up in front of you, because visuals is not just a quick way in that I save the time of having to describe everything in detail, but it requires less processing time. Smell requires the least processing power of the brain. Second to that is visuals. Auditory is at the other end of the scale. It requires the most processing power. And we care about that because our brain's about 3% of our body weight. It uses about 20% of our oxygen. So it's a very power hungry part of us. And that matters because when we have to use a lot of brain power, it's when we start to feel tired. So one of the underlying pieces of using these techniques, when we've got a massive workload and we need perhaps a bit more resilience, we need to be able to keep going longer and doing more than we ideally like to do. We need to cut the processing power so that we reduce the likelihood of us getting tired. If we get tired, we can't keep going. So using visuals to represent what's going on in our world, what I've still got to get done, we'll look at Cambrian chart in a while, is really important for how the brain works. Another thing, when I look at this roadmap and why this approach is so important, is that what it does is it feeds a habit, almost a repeatable structure. We've said that that gives us certainty because we're setting out the journey planner, if you like. But it does something else as well, in that when there's that sort of repeatable structure, the brain sort of knows, oh, okay, I kind of know what goes next. So what we're creating here is almost an automatic, I know what's going to happen next, I know what's going to happen next. And by breaking this down, what I've done is I've broken each of the iterations down into three simple processes that we'll have a look at GS stands for getting started, MP stands for making progress, RB stands for realizing benefits. Name them whatever you want. But the point is that I've given my brain a pattern to follow. And actually, our brains are pattern recognition machines. Our brains are constantly searching out, what do I do next? We don't realize because it's an automatic reaction. But our brains are constantly casting ahead what's going to happen next. I'm using a stand-up desk and I'm going into another meeting straight after this webinar. So already, although I'm going to call it to consciousness now, but I won't have realized, but my brain is already making preparations because it's thinking ahead. But actually, I need to take my laptop off the stand-up desk. I need to lower the stand-up desk. I need to get my papers for the next meeting. I need to take a deep breath, get my pencil out, and get ready to take notes. It's already produced that pattern. And what you're doing here is, again, cutting the processing power of the brain because you are giving it that pattern. So what we need to do next, it's all set out there. It's set out there visually. So it gives us that automatic response that cuts the processing power. I don't need to think. Yeah. Of course, that reduces the threat response, moves me much towards the reward response where I can remain creative. And of course, there's time saving here as well. The more I regularize something, I don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. That saves time. But also, the more I regularize something, then I'm unlikely to have forgotten something. And therefore, I'm less likely to have made mistakes. There's been in a meeting this morning where we've been talking about the importance of checklists for every activity when you're really busy, so that you know that you haven't missed anything out and you don't have to go back and re-engineer what you've done to take account of what you missed out. When we've got an overwhelming workload, we need to be smart. We'll pick that up again in a moment when I've got another technique for you. So simple, repeatable structure for these three processes. What I put in the book was, I was thinking about getting started, was the ideas, we're brainstorming really, working out the requirements, every sort of tiny little piece of work we have to do, but also the quality criteria, trying to work out, well, what does good look like then? What else do I need to be doing? We'll have a look at how that quality criteria is probably one of the most brain smart things we can do. Another thing we're going to look at is within getting started, before we actually do the work, we don't just have all the ideas, work out the requirements and work out what good looks like, but we also prioritize it, plan it in, schedule it, agree the resources. That means that I start to feel certain about what I need to do and the order in which I'm doing it. And therefore, I'm giving the brain what it needs and I'm reducing the anxiety and stress. So I'm moving me more towards a creative, innovative ideas space. In making progress, we're doing the work, we're testing that it meets that quality criteria. But as far as the brain is concerned, what I'm looking at is it's about experiencing an achievement after achievement after achievement. And that feeds that lovely chemical that we actually really enjoy, which is dopamine, which gives us a sense of achievement, a sense of progress, a sense that we're moving forward. And it gives us energy to want to have more of these things. Dopamine is the chemical that's also produced every time we get a like on social media, or we get a positive reaction in LinkedIn, for example. We know people have read and liked what we've done. Every time we have an achievement, and I give those examples just to show it can be a tiny achievement. It doesn't need to be massive. What we're looking for is we have one thing after another that we've got that done now, got that done now, got that done now. So that goes back to what we said earlier on about, can you break the work down into small pieces and even smaller pieces? Because every single time you get one thing completed, the brain's going, that was good, got that done, fantastic. So you're creating that positive feeling that gives you the energy to do more. And finally, when it comes to sort of realizing benefits, I was drawing this roadmap for change initiatives, but it applies to, some of the thinking applies to our own work as well. When you hand over work to others so they can start using it, you start to feel, well, that's good. It wasn't just that I achieved the work and I got what I needed done. Now I can start to see other people are benefiting from it. So we create that other lovely chemical, which is around trust and bonding, the oxytocin. Because you're going, oh yeah, I've helped somebody else, and you can see that it's making a difference and value. There's something else that we include in that realizing benefits, that handover box before we go on to the next iteration, the next one, is building in some time to reflect on what we've learned so that we not just get the achievement from a piece of work and not just the achievement from a piece of work is being valued. And then I can go further in my brain and go, well, I've got something learned from that piece of work. I've reflected on it and I'm thinking, yes, maybe I learned, I tried a new skill, I tried something out, I found a new shortcut. And therefore, that leads us into, as long as we remember to do this, to celebrate. We're not very good at this. We're constantly going, what's next? What's next? What's next? And if we can get into that reflective space, we're much more likely to be able to have new ideas as well, which of course is what we're after in terms of the quality of our work. One of the things that we want to be thinking about here is how can we put as many repeatable ways of doing these three steps into our work? Doesn't matter what it is. Have you got techniques that you can use and repeatedly use? For example, when it comes to the ideas generation piece, I have a number of workshop activities that I use to enable people to brainstorm but not forget anything. I've got a deck of cards here on my desk I was using for a workshop yesterday, where each of the cards is a question about the impact of a change, so that everybody gets a chance to grab a card, think of the answer, share their thoughts. So we're getting a really rich picture. It's something that I can always turn to, that deck of cards. I might do a pre-mortem activity where I get people to imagine all the things that might go wrong and how we can mitigate that risk before we get started on the work. In the making progress, I'm thinking about how do we identify what's the routine for our team meetings, make sure they are scheduled in, they are actually booked in people's calendars. Maybe agreeing, and this is something that's coming to the fore these days, actually agreeing the time when we'll actually do the work. We're so busy going to meetings, aren't we? We just don't leave any time for doing the work. And by the way, I would be inauthentic if I wasn't honest enough to say that the reason I came in at 7 o'clock this morning was I was trying to clear my own backlog. And I have a full diary of things to do today. So from 10 until now, I was doing something else, and I've got meetings straight after this and into the evening. So when was I supposed to do my work? It's blocking that out in the diary that makes us smarter as well. So whatever you can do to put the routine activities, techniques, tasks, these aren't boring. These are layering on a level of detail onto your journey, enables your brain to go, okay, I know what's coming up next. I know what's coming up next. And we can move through that without having to reinvent that wheel all the time. So think about how you layer on those activities. And for anything that you're doing, we're going to talk, I think, about quality criteria now, because that's a major, major thing from the world of Agile. So here's something else to regularize the pattern. Think about how do you structure your time using some ideas from the Agile Business Consortium and other Agile methods, ideas around if I'm going to do a lot of the brainstorming and discovery work, maybe I need to put some time around that. So let me hold in any iteration, any chunk of time, whether that's a week or a month or a couple of months, maybe put a limit of 20% of it on ideas generation, because that will leave more time for the work. That's one thing. Think about how, as I've said, regularize the activities, but also can you break down your steps into more specific steps, make it easier. So in the Agile Change book, I made a differentiation in when we're sort of brainstorming is that, yeah, there should be free form coming up with loads of ideas, but we should never leave this step without having gone through planning in terms of prioritizing the work and thinking about what good looks like. Because we want to give the majority of our time over to getting stuff done. So we've took a bit of time for the real thinking, but we know that we won't think and talk and not leave any time for work because we're using some of these boundaries around how time is divided. In making progress, any piece of work, we could show any piece of work as two steps. It's changing it and testing it. Because if we don't check that it works, that it's the things that we need in it early in the process, then we'll hand it over, it will form part of something else, and then we'll go, oh no, I forgot that bit. Where do you find the time with busy workloads to go back and oh, I've made a mistake, I've forgotten something. Oh, we need to get that back. Let's get that back and put this other thing in. How much time does that take? So every single time we do a piece of work, we need to think, oh yeah, I need to get it done, but also how do I test it? And then when I hand over a piece of work, deploy it into operational use at the bigger scale, when I'm doing a change, I'm deploying that change into operational use. But whenever I hand over a piece of work, is there something that we could get rid of? If I am writing a new template for somebody, where's the old template? Can we put that into the archive so we don't cause chaos and confusion later? So just that kind of routine where we make sure that we're not missing any steps. And I've put the celebrate, the reflection piece, the enjoyment, patting ourselves on the back, because that's the one that we generally forget. But it gives us the energy, the dopamine hit to want to do this all over again. And in an agile approach, that's the thing, isn't it? We're doing wave after wave after wave of change. So surely we are going to have to want to do it all over again. On a personal level, it's exactly the same every single day. Don't leave your office, or if you're not commuting, you're in the kitchen or you're in the shed in the garden. Don't close down your laptop lid without celebrating, reflecting on your achievements for the day. Because otherwise, how does your brain generate the energy to want to do it all over again? Without doing those regular celebrations, your brain's going to go, no, I'm staying in bed tomorrow. And actually getting up in the morning is going to be so much harder. So it isn't just at the macro scale of running any kind of change that agile change techniques apply, but they apply at the human level as well. A couple of things that make so much difference. We need to prioritize our work, and I've got a slide for that in just a moment. So we want to be working on only the most valuable things, absolutely. This one here around acceptance criteria, quality criteria, success criteria. What it is when you are sort of identifying the work and getting started, it's making sure you get into a lovely habit that you teach your brain that whenever you think of a piece of work, you also identify at that moment and what will good look like. What's it got to contain? What are the criteria that we can just check that we've done those things to make sure it's right. I'm doing a piece of repeatable work for a client over in the States at the moment. And one of the things that I've got on my little checklist of criteria is that the title is on every single slide. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But I'm doing a lot of copying and pasting, and the chances of the title being on the old title being on the slides. So it's one of those acceptance criteria. Make sure that, there's animation. So for and I checked the animation on each visual, and I make sure that the title is on there. But I've worked all that out before I get started on the work, because it's something that my brain will retain as I'm doing the work. So I'm more likely to get it right first time anyway. It also makes sure that I don't hand over a piece of work that I've got mistakes in them, because with an overwhelming workload, it will take too much time to fix. You think, oh, I don't want to be doing that. Let's not do that. We talked about visuals and how the brain responds to visuals. So something as simple as this, a Kanban chart, to do, doing, done. You can obviously make up your own headings. Instead of just having a to-do list, having some mechanism by which we can capture what's currently in progress, but importantly, as far as the brain's concerned, also having that visual representation of all the things that we've done. That is so important because every time we look at it, not just when we finish something, but also every time we look at it, we're sending a message to our brain. I've been quite productive today. Hey, I've got things finished. Piece of work I won't have to repeat. So the brain is creating that dopamine every time. It's going, that's good, that's good, that's good. Something to think about when it comes to these Kanban charts is thinking about, well, how do I make sure that I recognize that I've done something, that what you want, and why sticky notes can be so incredibly helpful is that you've got that physical move of things. I've got one in my office, and it's that move of I peel it off and go, right, okay, it's going from to do into doing. So I'm really focusing on, all right, okay, I know that's the thing I'm doing next. So I've sent a message to my brain, that's what you need to focus on. As I finish it and it's done, and I've tested it against the acceptance criteria and I put it in the done column, there's that physical, it might only be a tiny move of a post-it note, but again, it's creating a moment in the brain. I've physically done something, it's shifting things. Something else that I do, I have loads of scrap paper in my office. I'm often drawing diagrams and working out new ways of looking at things. So I do scribble quite a lot. And I can end up with, I was in a 2-day workshop last week, and I ended up with sort of 18 pages of things I had to do, notes I had to take. And honestly, it felt so overwhelming. Effectively, each of those pieces of paper, I didn't need a Kanban chart for it. Each of those pieces of paper was a to-do. In fact, I had quite a lot of to-do on it. And so what I did was I went into the office on Monday and I just sat there, no bank holiday for me. I just sat there, and as I got through each of them, I was actioning each one thing after another so that I knew that they were done. So I made a big fuss about getting my sort of my colored pen and just making a big sign on that piece of paper that it was done, because that was creating that dopamine response. And then the other thing I did was I actually crunched up the paper physically when it was done, and I threw it in the bin. In fact, to be honest, my throwing is actually rubbish. So half of the paper is actually from the dog. And some of you who've known me before know that I've got a 70-kilo dog, 12 and a half stone, and so he's very wide. So he actually had paper resting on his poor thing. And he just didn't notice. But it was that, hey, I've got another piece off, and I could see the pile of papers getting lower and lower. So it's whatever visual and physical way that you can create for tracking your progress, it's absolutely worth doing because it's sending a very powerful message to the brain. Of course, something else we want to think about is, hey, I need to, I'm not just going to do my work mindlessly, thoughtlessly. I need to prioritize it. So, what are the must-haves? I'm using Moscow. I'll talk about this in a moment. What are the should-haves? Is any of those a could-have? One of the big advantages, by the way, of doing this kind of visual or something similar is that when you have an idea, the brain is trying to hold that short-term memory. So how can you immediately capture it, easily capture it, so that your brain doesn't have to rely on it anymore, to have to keep thinking about it? And that's one of the reasons why I really like could haves. In fact, even a W won't have, because it won't have this time. So it still goes on my list and it never moves from the to-do list. But every now and again, I'll have a look and go, have circumstances changed that means that it's actually now more useful than I thought it was. Maybe its time has come. So I don't miss anything out, because I might have had this idea 3-4 months ago. I don't remember what I was doing 3-4 months ago. But because I captured it at the time, it's on there. I don't have to keep thinking the same thing. So it's brain processing power. I don't miss it out. I don't forget it. And it's there when I need it. one of the tricks I use, because my phone's always with me, and these ideas pop up all the time, don't they? And I know now that I do not want my brain cluttered with all sorts of things that I'm trying to remember, because that actually creates anxiety and stress, because my brain knows it's got a job to do. It's trying to remember everything. And therefore, I'm putting more processing power into my brain. So I don't want that. I want it to come, the idea to come, and then I want it to be captured. So I will find myself, and it's a habit of mine, you'll find something that works for you. But I send myself, use my phone, I send myself a quick email with the idea sketched out on it, and it just goes. And then what I know, and I head it up, the subject line's always the same, idea. And it goes straight into the ideas file in my emails. And whenever I've got the time, I will, it's often on a Friday morning, big cup of tea. I'll sit there and I'll have a look through and go, actually, those could be quite valuable at the moment. So again, it's using these techniques, but also understanding from a neuroscience perspective, why do they work? Why are they so helpful? It's a simple thing. As soon as you've had an idea, don't try to hold on to it. Picture it in another way. So your brain hasn't got that idea with all the other pieces that it's trying to deal with, because that bit's a sort of that's not really relevant. So it's taking away really important processing power from the thing you're supposed to be doing. So it's a way of decluttering the mind. And we've got so many interruptions that make it hard to focus, make it really hard to concentrate these days. Getting rid of any of those things is really helpful. When it comes to priorities, there's a few things that I shortcuts that come back from this agile change approach. I've just shown you Moscow, so that's really simple. There's the must, the should, the could, and of course the won't have this time. I'm also a scaled agile practitioner. Scaled agile is basically a sort of program approach for multiple agile initiatives. Think of an agile initiative as a project, and the scaled agile approach is more like program management agile. Really useful. And they've got something called weighted shortest job first. That's their prioritization mechanism. What I take from that, in a very quick way of thinking about it, is short, small. So it feeds back into, it's just a reminder for me sometimes to look at something and think, we've got half an hour and this piece of work is about 3 hours. But if I break it up into parts where I could actually slip half an hour's work in now, and that would be an actual achievement, my brain could celebrate before I go off and do something else. That would be really good. Let's do that. How do I keep it simple? I keep it simple. I find that the must, the should, the could, and the won't have this time, I'm not sure they're always that useful for my own to-do list, because they're a bit too big in the thinking. So I keep things simple when I've got all of my sort of to-dos. I just go through these key criteria to think, well, is it something I really need to do now or not? So first of all, does it have a deadline? And is that deadline today? Because if it's today, I'll get it done. And even though I want to do things that I know have a deadline, maybe for tomorrow or early next week, no, no, just prioritize the things that have a deadline today, Melanie. So there was something that I wanted to do this morning, but actually, I needed to focus on this webinar and getting my notes together for this webinar. And it was just that piece of sort of being strict with myself and going, no, the webinar's at lunchtime, Melanie. You need to get a grip and focus on that. I'm thinking, what's the top priorities when there are people waiting? I knew you'd be dialing in for the webinar. So knowing that you were waiting for me to do this, I need to focus on this thing. Is it a piece of work that will create answers that unblocks other work getting done? So is it an enabler of some kind? Because surely that's going to be something that I want to prioritize. And then I have to look at the value. Does it solve a problem? Does it deliver something useful or valuable to me, to other people? So is it directly linked to the creation of the benefits that we're looking for? So it's thinking about those simple things that enable me to just find and do the top priority first. And as we've said, physically acknowledge the achievement when I've done it, using the scrunched up paper or moving the post-it note or whatever it is. That's the way that I cope with the overwhelming workload I have. And I know all of you have as well. So thank you for squeezing in coming to a webinar or listening to this recording. Hopefully, as I talk about these techniques, you can see they're coming from the Agile Change Agent course. So, and there's loads of them. I can do lots and lots of work on the course about how we actually break things down into smaller constituent parts, which is a session that everybody seems to love and is a skill set that we increasingly need. But also, hopefully, you've heard me talk with passion about how I want us to be brain smart. I need to do things that work, but actually, at the end of the day, let me work with my brain, not against it. My brain is into pattern recognition. My brain is into certainty. My brain doesn't want to hold on to lots of information that's far in the future if I'm not dealing with far in the future right now. My brain wants to just focus on what's right in front of me. I've got a journey planner that shows there are outcomes and iterations later on, but right now, Mel, you're safe. You can focus just on this and getting this done. So I know that what I want to do is try to reduce the stress of my workload, because if I am stressed, then I'll get into, and I'm sure we all can all recognize this, that sort of transactional busyness. I'll get things done, but I'm not having a chance to have the bigger thinking and to have the ideas and to make connections and have insights that actually what I need to be offering. That's actually what my job is to do amazing thinking. Everything else, we've got AI, let's be honest. So as a human being at work, if I want to keep working, I need to offer value. And that's what we're looking at. So I think there's a lot of overlap between the agile change techniques are all about the ideas for being smart. The neuroscience course, I think, teaches you um, why these things are smart. And the feedback from the courses is brilliant, genuine, and exciting, because people think this is so helpful, and that's what inspires me. There are only a couple of days, but a couple of days in which you get a globally recognized certificate. But at the same time, you also just feel inspired, you feel stretched, you learn lots of little shortcuts and techniques from me and from other people. And it's just inspiring and energizing, because you know you've had a major achievement. You've also got a global certificate. So another thing the brain's hanging off of. For sure, I can't see any questions in the chat, but what I would ask you to do right now, before we finish, is so that you can maximize your learning and you can do something different, is to think, what of all the things that I've talked have really resonated? What's the one thing? So this is a great technique for getting the brain to focus, to ask it to only find one thing, not load, just one thing. You go, it's really worked for me. It's really resonated. Just put it in the chat, because it will inspire other people. And we are here to inspire and learn from each other. Just thinking about, and it's a great revision opportunity to be thinking about prioritization. We're thinking about how we visually represent all the things we've got to do, how we physically can celebrate by moving sticky notes and scrunching up bits of paper, how we can make sure that we've always got acceptance criteria so we don't waste time on work that doesn't work, that we actually get things done. So put in the chat one thing that's really sitting with you. Do you like the visual of the roadmap? Do you like the idea that you can divide the roadmap into chunks? What is it that's really hitting home for you? Because I want you to walk away from this with a valuable something. Do something different. You didn't come and give up your time just to listen to me. You wanted to be able to do something different. So what is it you were going to do differently? That's what I'm challenging you to think about. So I'm just going to read a few of the things, just going to work my way down here. Visuals has really hit home for people, I think. using the visuals to help prioritize the work, absolutely. So that's a really good thing here. But only listening to information as opposed to visuals is more tiresome on the brain. Oh yeah, really tiring. Because what we're trying to do, what our brains thinks in pictures. So we're trying to create visual pictures off the words that people use, using Kanban rather than just a to-do list, a lovely visual. I've got just some magic whiteboard on my wall and a load of post-it notes. This is not sophisticated, but it is effective for the brain. Again, a visual record, the done column, enjoying ticking things off. You enjoy it because it creates dopamine, and dopamine makes us feel lovely. And we want more of that. Allocating time to realize benefits, to reflect, to go, I've achieved something. This has made a difference. I've learned something, whether it's a personal benefit or an organizational benefit. Any reflection on that achievement, again, creates that dopamine. Using the roadmap idea for managing your own workload, absolutely. You'd be horrified to see that I have a roadmap that takes me from now until Christmas. In fact, I have one for the whole year. Obviously, I'm I'm 4.5 months into it now, and it's just a way of looking. And I've got an iteration that covers July and August. I agree with my colleague, that we're going to have a quieter time. Marlene's laughing when I say quieter time, but we're not going to do the events for the change capability community for things like that. So we've got that iteration. Then we have another iteration that goes from September all the way through to mid-December, which is an absolute, at the top peak of what we do. Loving the visuals of the roadmap really helps the stakeholder take a step back. Totally agree, Tim. I had somebody from a local authority who started using the roadmap, particularly the outcomes, and they found that it really helped their sponsor to just focus in on that bigger, more strategic piece that you want the sponsor to focus in on. Love the idea of using the roadmap. Also going back to Moscow. Yeah, there's a lot in there, isn't there? There's a commonality I can see with these comments about the visuals. Somebody's put in there, taking time to celebrate. Absolutely right. Have we ever booked that in? I know this sounds really stupid, but I try to make sure that when I walk to my car at the end of any day, I make sure that I think what has gone well today? What can I celebrate? What can I put myself in the back for? Because so many of us are in situations where we're not necessarily getting a lot of positive feedback from our colleagues and our bosses because we're maybe working remotely. We don't see many people. When I'm working from home, I've got the same routine. When I close down the laptop lid, that sends a signal to my brain to think positively for a moment, to find something good. A lot of people saying the certainty piece. Yeah. Um, Knowing that the brain is a pattern recognition thing. Break down whatever you're doing into a little journey, and then your brain will go, I know what I need to do. I know what I need to do. So you're feeding your brain with exactly what's needed. Well, thank you very much. I love the fact that you've all come away with something, one thing that's useful. So I'm going to shut up now. So you've got time to go off. It's coming up to 25 past. So you've got time now to go off before your next meeting at probably at 1/2 past, or a bit more if you've got time for a sandwich or maybe breakfast if you're in the States before you get started. So thank you so much for joining me. As always, it's an absolute pleasure. And the most important thing I'll say is please, please put some time in your diary to skill. Once you have a qualification, nobody can ever take it away from you. And if you don't put the time in to do your own personal development, nobody else is going to do it for you. And you'll find that another year's gone by when you haven't got a new qualification. And then people like me who are always hiring people are going, oh, yeah, they don't invest in themselves. They don't know anything new. Or we'll have to pay to train them. Oh, I don't think they're a winning candidate. So I'm afraid to say that it's the truth, isn't it? So don't let time fly past. Book in a couple of days, or if you're really pushed for time, make sure on the Agile Change Agent one or the Agile Change Coach, you do the online self-paced. Take care, guys. Thank you, and I'll see you at the next one.